everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. For this episode of Let's Mix Season 2, I got this all edited together and everything. I started to work on the drums, on the drum mix. And as soon as I got it edited and watched it back and listened back to it and everything, I realized I made a pretty bad drum mix. Like pretty bad. Like bad enough that I would have been ashamed to have gone ahead and put out this episode and just pass it off as some sort of tutorial. Really, it was a tutorial in just making a not very good drum mix. So what I figured I would do with this one is I've got the project pulled up here in my editor and figured to hit just kind of a few highlights and at least kind of go through what I think I did wrong and what I would do differently. And then here in a future episode, I'll do kind of a legit remix of the drums as a whole. All right, first things first, let's forward through here until we get to where I'm actually messing. So I start with the kick drum here. So let's get to where I'm actually messing with the kick drum. All right. Okay, so for the kick, let's go out analog 3. And I'm going to send it to the VLA. So let's send it to channel 1 of the VLA. And okay, first things first here. I did play the kick drum just a little bit, and really as I listened back to it, I thought that the kick drum sounded actually pretty good on its own without really much anything. One thing that I did think the kick drum had a little bit too much of that like 5 kilohertz like beater smack, you know, that just kind of clicky sound of the beater actually impacting. Rather than that low thud that you associate. The beater smack is good because it helps a kick stand out in a mix, even if somebody's listening on a system where they don't have a whole lot of low end, then at least the beater smack is still just kind of an indication of when the kick is hitting. Okay, so this kick had just like a little bit too much of that in it. Let's see if we can find a little bit of an example of that here. Okay. Clear him out of the way. Okay, yeah. Now, okay, so right there you can kind of hear the kick in the background. Yeah, sorry, I'll see if I can make this louder in post here for you. But really, all in all, since JD's using Easy Drummer is already relatively processed. There's already some compression and some EQ applied to it. So all the kits in Easy Drummer already kind of have a lot of what I would try to do to them. So I think what I really kind of found here is that the drums didn't need as much as I was trying to do to them. But let's keep listening to the kick here. Go for sound. So here, let's take a. Because you can see we're barely getting any gain, barely
I talk too much.
Barely getting any gain reduction here, so I want a little more gain reduction than that, so let's turn the threshold down. Okay, let's get a little aggressive with the ratio. And I think for this compressor, that was just a little too much of a ratio. This compressor just gets a little almost too aggressive at higher ratios. With the distressors, I found I can get away with a higher ratio, but the VLA, it starts to sound really conspicuous once you really start cranking up the ratio. Let's turn the attack. Actually, see what happens if we turn the attack up and the release way down. Get a little output level. So let's hear it without. Yeah, all we really did was make it quieter. Yeah, and I have to agree there. We didn't really do anything to improve the sound. So that's kind of one of the things you have to watch when you're starting to mix, is that you're not just doing things just for the sake of doing it. There's nothing wrong with experimenting and just seeing what happens, but when it comes down to it, like, I don't even think that I needed the compressor on this. I think just some EQ would have done the trick. All right, and here we hear it in context a little bit. Yeah, so in what you're hearing there, like the kick is just kind of gone. It just kind of disappeared out of the mix there. So I need to do a little bit more EQ work, and I think just ditch the compressor, because all it's doing is removing the things that are going to allow the kick to stand out, which is just removing that transient. And I think with that kick and this mix, I think it's going to need all the transient it can get to still remain a part of the mix and not just disappear. All right, so now we move on to the snare, and really what I ended up doing here is pretty much the exact opposite of what I was hoping to do. So the snare sample in this song it's a fairly ringy snare. So after the initial whack, there's a little bit of resonance of the the shell and everything, just kind of ringing at a certain set of overtones. Generally, for me, I don't like that, and so the compression settings that I was searching for here was something that would allow the initial transient through, and then kind of clamp down on that ring just to de-emphasize it. Now with a compressor, you're not going to get rid of the ring, but you can de-emphasize it enough relative to the initial impact, that initial transient, that you can make it just kind of disappear into the mix. And what I ended up doing was the exact opposite. I ended up with a snare sound that was just kind of lifeless and emphasized the ring, which was just totally backwards from what I was trying to accomplish. Let's take a listen here. So here I am just kind of just getting the snare run through channel 2 of my Pro VLA, fiddling around with it a little bit. So let's see just a little bit of that. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, let's go with that. Let's go with that. So, okay, yeah. So here, I even disliked it enough that while I was editing, I even added a text overlay here saying, I don't like this setting at all. So yeah, let's just take a quick listen again to what I ended up with. And just keep in mind, I'm trying to de-emphasize the ring of the snare, and as I make those adjustments and land on this final setting, it just does the opposite. Okay, yeah, let's go with that. Let's go. Yeah, let's not go with that. Okay, so yeah, enough ragging on my own snare mixing here, but I do like that kind of super compressed snare sound on the direct snare mic, just because when you mix that in with the overheads, I think it does just kind of add some impact and a little bit of the just kind of personality of the snare. Unfortunately, the personality of this snare, I just don't really care for. It's just too ringy for me, and it's just got that kind of steady overtone that it keeps, every time it hits. It's just got that pitch that follows every hit, and I don't really want that to be a part of this mix. So yeah, again, I'll come back later and I will do it correctly with different attack and release settings. Honestly, I think through that compressor it sounds okay. I think that the ratio and the threshold and output gain sound okay. It's just my attack and release are totally wrong for this, so we'll come back to it, do it right next time. Okay, now we move on to the toms, and since I only have 4 channels of outboard compression to work with, so if I have kick, snare, and then a stereo overhead, that's all 4 channels, so that didn't really leave anything for the toms. So what I decided to do here was just use a software compressor. So first I tried Waves H Comp, and let's take just kind of a quick listen at what I ended up with that. I ended up not liking that even at the time, but let's take a quick listen. I don't mind that so much, but really listening to it, A-Bing it next to the clean, the toms with no compressor, I don't really think that it really adds anything. And again, we don't just want to start adding stuff just for the sake of adding it. We want to add something because it improves it in whatever we're going for. And in this mix, since the toms have so much of a kind of driving force to big sections of the song, I didn't really feel like the settings that I had for Waves H Comp here really emphasized like that attack of the toms. Like I wanted those toms to just kind of have a, I don't know, a certain spank to them, just to where that initial transient is just kind of, you know, whammo, and then I can let the overheads kind of fill in some of the roominess and pitch of the toms. I just really kind of wanted like a whack kind of sound to it, since they're, you know, they're really driving the song here. So I ended up trying a different compressor, a free compressor from Variety of Sound called Thrill Seeker LA. It's an LA2A clone. So let's take a listen to that. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so that really does approach what I'm kind of hearing in my head of what I want. Like, you can kind of hear it really does really emphasize that attack, and it just makes every like little smack just kind of really start to jump out. Unfortunately, I think I just dialed in a little too much of it, and I had problems from then on in the mix with the toms causing clipping and just kind of weird distortion and clicks and pop kind of artifacts. I think part of that is due, you know, this is the free VST. It's 32-bit, so it's running in bridge mode, since my audio computer here is all 64-bit. So it just, as much as I like what it did from an audio perspective, I think just from a technological perspective, it wasn't really right for this. And also I just kind of dialed in just, I think, a little too much of it. I got a little carried away with it. Okay, next I brought in the hi-hat, and in this one I'm still working with the MP3 hi-hat that I had to kind of go salvage. I do now actually have the wave file for the hi-hat, so when I remix the drums, I'll bring that in and actually work with that. Yeah, the hi-hat is something really unfortunate to have in MP3 format, because MP3s tend to be most conspicuously low quality in the extreme lows and the extreme highs. And since a hi-hat is largely high frequency information, that high frequency information really gets kind of degraded when you compress a file into an MP3. So yeah, I'm looking forward to actually working with the actual wave, but let's take just kind of a quick listen at what I ended up doing with that. Honestly, I don't really think the hi-hat sounds very good on this drum sample library anyways. But I just wanted to bring it in so I could control a little bit of where the hi-hat lives in the stereo field, despite where it lives in the overhead stereo image, since I don't have any control over that. And then in context, you know, yeah, not just a great sounding hi-hat. It almost sounds somewhere between a hi-hat and a tambourine or something. There's some quality to it. I can't really put my finger on it. I just don't like it. Yeah, so I ended up with this just big giant scoop out at 500K. I think that's how much it took. And honestly, you know, this stuff between, you know, 100 and 500, they could probably do away with that as well, because I can't imagine that's adding much to the sound at this point. Let's just take a quick listen. Okay, let's hear it in context. It was a joke. But yeah, I think what I ended up with in the drum mix was just way too much hi-hat. The hats already come through so much in the overheads that yeah, it's just not really adding a whole lot. I just want to be able to control placement in the stereo field more. So as I remix the drums, I'll see if I can find a way to kind of pull that off. Okay, and so the last component here is the drum bus as a whole. And this is something that I think that I came close on, but I think I just, you know, got just a little too much compression. So what I wanted to do was run the drum bus as a whole as a stereo signal through both of my distressors where they are in a linked stereo configuration. I ended up at a 10:1 ratio, which on the distressors is like their opto setting, which I personally like a lot. 10:1 is a very aggressive setting, but somehow these things pull it off. I really kind of like it. I think my attack and release settings were fine. I think that I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish there. I just think I ended up just compressing it too much, just kind of clamping down on it too much. And then all of the shortcomings of the drum mix up to this point all kind of added together once I just, clamped down on the dynamic range of everything. The lack of the kick drum, the too much spiky sound on the toms, the ringy snare, and the kind of overbearing hi-hat, and the fact that I think I had the overheads mixed too loud. All of that just kind of got made worse, at this point. So let's take a quick listen to what that sounded like. Okay, I'm liking it already. I think the attack sounds good where it's at. Let's see, let's dial that release down. Oh, I can already hear just a little bit of that coming out. All right, good, good, good. I can do a little bit of makeup gain here. A little more makeup gain. And maybe just a little more makeup gain. Okay, and one final thing that I thought was wrong with the drum mix overall was that, so my distressors are not matched. They're not match pair. The serial numbers are 10,000 apart. They were manufactured years apart. And while Empirical Labs does have some pretty exacting standards, there's just no way to have the same input and output gain and all the exact same characteristics from, two units manufactured years apart. So one thing that I failed to take into account, and I know this, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me at the time, but one of my two distressors has a slightly higher output than the other one. So when I'm using them in a stereo configuration like this, if I have both of the units' output gains set to the same setting, the stereo image is going to lean one way a little bit. And I even noticed that in my metering during this episode, and it still didn't make it register. So what I have to do is make sure to keep one of my distressors, the one that has just the slightly higher output, I just have to dial it down maybe half of a notch, and that'll more closely match the output of the other one. And if I don't do that, then yeah, one side is louder than the other, and so it makes my mix lean that way. And so I not only did that with the drum bus here, but I did that when later here in the series I'll send some of the stereo doubled vocals through it, and anything that I sent through those as a stereo pair, they all lean the same way. And so as I was kind of referencing the mix in different systems, yeah, I started to notice, like, everything's louder over here than it is over here. What's going on? And then it occurred to me, oh yeah, derp. All right, so I think I have thoroughly trashed my own drum mix for this time. So, thanks for tuning in and watching, how not to make a drum mix. I will revisit this in a future episode, and I'm not so sure that I'll spend the time going through everything that I do. I think I'll just kind of hit the highlights. Now that we know what not to do, that should make it a little bit easier to figure out what to do. So thank you for watching this time, and I'll see you next week for the next episode of Let's Mix Season 2.